It was supposed to be a quiet night in Austin, Texas. A Friday evening in December 1991, four teenage girls, close friends, wrapped in the warmth of youth and routine. At the "I can't believe it's yogurt" shop, laughter mixed with the sweet smell of frozen desserts. The girls, Jennifer Harbison, Eliza Thomas, Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers, were preparing to close up for the night. None of them could have known that within the hour, the shop would become the scene of one of the most disturbing mass murders in Texas history. When firefighters responded to reports of smoke just after midnight, they expected a small kitchen blaze. What they found instead was unthinkable. Inside the charred remains of the shop were the bodies of all four girls, bound, shot, and deliberately set on fire. More than 30 years later, the yogurt shop murders remain a wound in Austin's memory, unsolved and still haunting those who remember. This is not just a story about a crime. It's about the limits of justice, the failures, and persistence of an investigation, and the enduring hope that someone, somewhere, holds the truth. Tonight, we reopen the case files, follow the newest forensic leads, and examine the unanswered questions, in search of the truth that's been missing for decades. In the early 1990s, Austin wasn't yet the bustling tech hub it would become. Back then, it was still a relatively small city, a patchwork of college life, family neighborhoods, and close-knit communities. People here knew their neighbors. They trusted that the doors to a small yogurt shop could close at night without worry. The "I Can't Believe It" yogurt store sat in a modest strip mall on West Anderson Lane. Brightly lit inside with pastel colors and cheerful posters, it was a safe place where families came for dessert, and teenagers worked after school. Among the employees were Eliza Thomas, 17, and Jennifer Harbison, also 17, who often closed the shop together. On the night of December 6, 1991, Jennifer's younger sister Sarah, just 15, had joined them. Sarah's best friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, came along too. They were inseparable, two pairs of friends overlapping into one small circle. That Friday evening, the girls worked their shift as usual. Witnesses remember customers lingering late, including a few unfamiliar faces. Around 10 p.m., the last orders were served and the shop began to wind down. Chairs were stacked, counters wiped. No one suspected that these were the final moments the girls would be seen alive outside of the crime scene. At approximately 11:47 p.m., a passing patrol officer noted the shop's lights were still on. That wasn't unusual for a Friday close. Sometimes staff stayed late to clean. What happened between that moment and the early hours of December 7th remains one of the central mysteries. Shortly after midnight, black smoke was seen curling from the yogurt shop's roof. Firefighters arrived expecting to extinguish a minor blaze. Instead, inside the scorched building, in the back area near the storage and preparation room, they discovered the remains of all four girls. They had been bound with cloth, shot in the head at close range, and set on fire in what investigators believed was an attempt to destroy evidence. The fire was localized, suggesting it was deliberately set. The crime shocked Austin. In the following days, the strip mall became a memorial. Flowers, candles, handwritten notes covering the storefront. Media descended, broadcasting the horror nationwide. The victims' families, suddenly thrust into the spotlight, faced a devastating reality. Not only had their daughters been murdered, but the brutality suggested multiple assailants, possibly still at large in their own community. Detectives with the Austin Police Department launched what would become one of the most exhaustive investigations in Texas history. More than 50 detectives were assigned to the case. They canvassed the area, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and pursued hundreds of tips. Early on, two unidentified men spotted in the shop before closing were considered persons of interest. Composite sketches were released, and a reward was offered. Leads poured in, but none provided the evidence needed for an arrest. Over the years, the case became a test of endurance for law enforcement and a source of frustration for the public. Promising suspects emerged, only to be cleared. At times, pressure to solve the case led to controversial arrests, some ending in overturned convictions. Evidence degraded with time, and some investigative records were lost or mishandled. Yet, despite setbacks, the memory of the yogurt shop murders never faded. Every few years, new forensic technology or a tip from the public would breathe temporary life into the case. Each time, families hoped for closure. Each time, they were left waiting. More than 3 decades later, the questions remain as sharp as they were in 1991. Who killed these 4 girls? Why? And how have they managed to evade justice for so long? In the 48 Hours tradition, we don't just revisit a cold case by retelling the crime. We walk with investigators through the files, the evidence rooms, and the places where the story still lives. The yogurt shop murders investigation was massive from the start, but the way it's been re-examined over time is its own story. From the earliest days, the Austin Police Department treated the case as a high-priority homicide. A dedicated task force worked full-time, logging hundreds of tips and following leads that spanned across Texas. The initial theory was that this was the work of more than one offender. Possibly a robbery gone wrong, possibly something far darker. Crime scene analysis suggested multiple weapons and more than one set of footprints. Investigators conducted door-to-door interviews in the neighborhood surrounding the shop. They re-interviewed employees, past customers, and people who had been in the strip mall that night. Composite sketches of 2 unidentified men, seen by a witness shortly before closing, were circulated widely. Despite this, the sketches never produced a confirmed identification. By the mid-1990s, the case began to shift. New detectives took over, bringing fresh eyes but inheriting the frustrations of a stalled investigation. Some leads were rechecked, others were abandoned due to lack of corroborating evidence. The challenge wasn't a shortage of suspects. It was the inability to connect anyone to the crime scene with evidence strong enough to stand in court. In the late 90s and early 2000s, prosecutors believed they had their break. 4 young men, all teenagers at the time of the murders, were arrested and charged. 2 of them were convicted, but those convictions would not last. In 2009, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the convictions after ruling that key evidence was questionable and that the defendants' confessions may have been coerced. The charges were eventually dismissed. For the victims' families, it was another devastating blow. Closure, once again, slipping away. After that legal collapse, the case entered a quieter phase. Officially, it remained open. Unofficially, the weight of decades made it difficult to sustain momentum. Detectives moved on or retired, witnesses aged, memories faded. Though degraded, these samples hinted at the presence of individuals who could not be identified with the technology of 1991. In 2023, a renewed investigative push began. The Travis County District Attorney's office partnered with outside forensic labs to apply advanced DNA analysis and genealogical matching. The Travis County District Attorney's office partnered with outside forensic labs to apply advanced DNA analysis and genealogical matching. This process, similar to the method that solved the Golden State Killer case, involves comparing crime scene DNA to publicly available genealogy databases to locate potential relatives of the suspect. For journalists covering this re-examination, the process was as much about patience as persistence. Requests for comment from the Austin police were met with measured responses. "We are working with all available resources," one detective told us. "This case has never left our desks or our minds." The families of the victims, now decades older, have learned to navigate the tension between hope and caution. Every time a new test is announced, they allow themselves a moment to imagine answers. But they also know how fragile those hopes can be. This is where the story stands today. at the intersection of memory, science, and the relentless question of who committed one of the most notorious crimes in Austin's history. For decades, the evidence from the yogurt shop murders sat in sealed envelopes and climate-controlled boxes, fibers, bindings, clothing, bullet casings. Technology in 1991 could not unlock all of their secrets. But science evolves, and with it, so does the potential for justice. In 2017, forensic labs began to revisit the case with more advanced DNA testing. Items once thought too contaminated or degraded for analysis, like the victim's clothing or small lengths of cloth used to bind them, were examined again. This time, instead of looking for large, obvious genetic samples like blood or hair, scientists searched for touch DNA. Microscopic skin cells left behind when someone simply handles an object. A single skin cell can contain the complete genetic blueprint of a person. But extracting it is only part of the challenge. Preserving its integrity after decades in storage requires precision work. Technicians in sterile lab conditions swabbed the surfaces, ran amplification processes to multiply the tiny DNA fragments, and then compared them against existing profiles in the FBI's combined DNA index system, Coldest. The first results were both promising and frustrating. They confirmed that multiple individuals had left biological material on certain items. However, the genetic profiles were incomplete, what's known in forensic science as partial profiles. These can suggest possible matches, but without a full sequence, they're not admissible in court. That's where a newer investigative tool came into play: forensic genetic genealogy. It led to the capture of the Golden State Killer in 2018, and dozens of other long unsolved cases have followed. But it's not instant. The process can take months, or even years, as genealogists verify records, rule out false leads, and match timelines. In the yogurt shop murders, investigators have been careful with public statements about what the genealogy work has revealed. "There are developments we can't discuss," one lab representative told us, "but we are closer today than we've ever been to putting a name to the DNA." In addition to genealogy, other technologies are helping re-examine the evidence. Advances in ballistics have allowed for new imaging of the bullets recovered at the scene, producing sharper comparisons to known firearms. Fiber analysis, too, has improved. Small textile fragments found at the crime scene can now be matched to specific manufacturing periods and possibly linked to a suspect's clothing. Some of the most intriguing developments have come from environmental DNA, or eDNA, tiny genetic traces found in soil or dust that can suggest who or what has been in a particular location. Samples taken from the bindings and the shop's back room are being analyzed for secondary DNA, which might indicate whether the killer had been in the shop before the night of the murders. It's a painstaking process, and not all of it will lead to courtroom evidence. But for investigators, every new data point, every narrowed list of names, is progress. The forensic breakthroughs are not just about science, they also serve as a bridge to human memory. When detectives return to re-interview witnesses, they can now confront them with far more specific questions. Were you ever inside the shop before that night? Did you know anyone with a particular make of firearm? These details, vague in the haze of decades past, sometimes trigger recollections that were dormant for years. Still, there are challenges. Not all genealogical matches lead to a suspect. In some cases, the DNA might belong to someone who handled an object in the shop weeks before the murders, rather than during the crime. Contamination, both from the scene and the decades of storage, complicates interpretation. For the families, news of breakthroughs is met with cautious optimism. In interviews, some relatives have said they appreciate the transparency from today's investigators compared to the early years. Others admit they've learned not to get their hopes up too quickly. One family member put it plainly: We've been told before that they were close. We've been told before that the DNA would solve it. Until someone is arrested and convicted, I can't let myself believe it's over. And so the work continues, quietly, methodically. Each swab, each data run, each family tree built from distant DNA matches brings the investigators closer. The question remains whether the final link will come in time for the families to see justice served. Forensic science can uncover new names, but often the breakthrough comes when science meets memory. In the yogurt shop murders, witness accounts have been both a lifeline and a source of frustration. In the early days of the investigation, one of the most significant leads came from a man who had been in the strip mall shortly before closing time. He reported seeing two young men, both white, one with long hair, the other with shorter hair, inside the yogurt shop. They didn't appear to be customers. They lingered, looking toward the back. Based on that account, police released 2 composite sketches. The public reaction was immediate. Tips flooded in. But none of the leads led to confirmed identifications. As months passed, other witnesses emerged with conflicting descriptions. One remembered a man in a green army jacket leaving the shop. Another saw a dark-colored vehicle idling nearby. None of these details could be tied together into a coherent suspect profile. Detectives interviewed hundreds of people, including employees from nearby businesses. Some remembered seeing the girls closing up. Others recalled unusual behavior from certain customers in the weeks before the murders. But no single account provided the link investigators needed. In the years that followed, suspect focus shifted. A group of 4 young men, teenagers at the time, came under scrutiny in the late 90s. They were questioned extensively, and in 1999, 2 of them were convicted. Those convictions, however, rested heavily on confessions that the defense argued were coerced. When the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the convictions in 2009, citing insufficient evidence and flawed interrogation practices, the case's suspect pool effectively reset to 0. The overturning of those convictions marked a pivotal moment, not just legally but in public perception. Many began to question whether the original investigation had been compromised by tunnel vision. Families of the accused insisted they had been scapegoated. Families of the victims felt betrayed by a system that had promised closure but delivered more questions. Since then, detectives have gone back to the original witness list. With modern investigative interviewing techniques designed to reduce memory contamination, they've reapproached those who were there that night. Interestingly, some details have sharpened with time. One former employee from a nearby store told investigators that, decades later, she still remembers the unease she felt when a man leaned into the shop just before closing, scanning the room before walking away. Digital technology has also aided re-examination. The original composite sketches have been run through facial approximation software that accounts for changes in aging and lighting. These updated images have been recirculated quietly among law enforcement and select members of the public. In some cases, the software-generated updates resemble known individuals in old case files, men who were questioned but never charged. Investigators have also tapped into new witness pools. By publicizing the case in true crime podcasts and television segments, they've reached people who may not have realized they held relevant information. One tip in 2024 came from someone who claimed to have been in the strip mall parking lot that night as a teenager. They described seeing 2 men leaving the shop quickly, one carrying what looked like a duffel bag. That detail, while unconfirmed, matches a theory investigators have long considered, that the killers may have taken items from the scene. Even partial witness recollections can become significant when paired with physical evidence. For example, if DNA genealogy narrows a suspect list to a handful of names, those names can be cross-checked against witness statements about appearance, behavior, and vehicles. Yet, despite these renewed efforts, some obstacles remain immovable. Key witnesses have died. Others suffer from memory degradation after more than 30 years. And the composite sketches, powerful as they once were, are still just approximations. What has changed is the way the public is engaged. Today, investigators are careful to present information in a way that encourages credible tips without creating a frenzy of false leads. In a case this old, every wasted lead consumes valuable time and resources. One detective speaking to us off camera summarized it simply. The witnesses who saw something back then, if they were still alive, are the most valuable voices we have. But the killer or killers, they've had decades to bury their secrets. Our job is to dig them back up. As the suspect pool narrows, the overlap between science and human recollection becomes critical. The hope is that one day, a surviving witness will hear a name from investigators and simply say, "Yes, that's who I saw." The yogurt shop murders didn't just end 4 young lives. They fractured families, shook a community, and left a scar on Austin that has yet to fade. For the Harbison family, losing both Jennifer and Sarah in one night was almost impossible to comprehend. Jennifer was the older sister, protective, ambitious, a high school senior with college in her sights. Sarah, just 15, was known for her quick smile and deep loyalty to friends. Their parents, in the days after the murders, had to navigate both grief and the unrelenting attention of the press. Eliza Thomas, Jennifer's co-worker and friend, had a future that promised independence. She was saving money for her own car, talking about career possibilities, and thinking about moving into her first apartment. For her family, the shop was supposed to be a safe place, the kind of after-school job parents could feel good about. And then there was Amy Ayers, the youngest of the 4. At just 13, she had her whole life ahead. Her friends described her as curious and adventurous, with a love of animals and a knack for making people laugh. Amy had joined Sarah that night for what was meant to be a simple sleepover. She never came home. In the weeks following the crime, Austin came together in ways both public and private. Hundreds attended candlelight vigils outside the shop, where mourners lit candles and left flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes. Churches held special services, and local businesses raised money for the victims' families. But the years took a toll. As the investigation stalled, the memorials faded. New developments in the city changed the physical landscape, but for those closest to the victims, the absence was constant. Birthdays passed. Graduations that never happened were imagined but never celebrated. Weddings that should have been joyful milestones became moments of bittersweet reflection. For the surviving family members, grief transformed over time. It didn't disappear. It settled into the rhythm of their lives. But anniversaries of the crime and news of fresh leads could bring it roaring back. As one parent put it, "Every time they say there's a new development, I feel like I'm holding my breath all over again." The wider Austin community, too, has never forgotten. Even among younger residents who weren't alive in 1991, the case is part of the city's collective memory. It's retold in classrooms, revisited in local media, and kept alive by true crime interest online. For those who lived through it, the shock of such brutality in what was seen as a safe city still lingers. Many recall double-checking their locks at night in the weeks afterward. Parents became more protective. Teenagers found their freedom subtly curtailed. A simple trip to a late-night shop didn't feel the same. The family's resilience has been tested repeatedly by the slow pace of justice. Some have chosen to speak publicly, keeping the victims' names in the headlines. Others have stepped back, choosing privacy over publicity. But all share the same hope, that the truth will emerge and that those responsible will be held accountable. One thing has remained constant: the promise that Austin Police and the District Attorney's office have repeated over the years. We will not close this case until it is solved. It's a promise that comforts, but also one that carries the weight of decades of waiting. If solving a murder were only a matter of identifying a suspect, the yogurt shop murders might have been closed long ago. But the legal path from suspicion to conviction is far more complex, and in this case, it's been especially treacherous. From the start, investigators faced challenges that would complicate any prosecution. The crime scene was partially destroyed by fire, which investigators believe was intentionally set to obliterate evidence. That fire consumed not only potential DNA and fingerprints, but also altered the physical layout of the scene, making reconstruction difficult. In the late 1990s, prosecutors thought they had their case. 4 young men, teenagers at the time of the murders, were arrested and charged. 2 were convicted in 1999 and 2002, but these convictions hinged largely on confessions obtained after lengthy interrogations. Defense attorneys argued the confessions were coerced, pointing to inconsistencies between the statements and the physical evidence. By 2009, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the convictions, citing insufficient evidence and unreliable confession practices. The remaining charges against the other 2 suspects were dropped. The result was devastating for the victims, families, and left prosecutors with a cautionary tale. Moving forward without airtight evidence can unravel years of work. Another hurdle is the chain of custody. Over 30 years, evidence has been handled by multiple people, moved between storage facilities, and in some cases, subjected to earlier forensic testing that consumed samples. In court, the defense can and will challenge whether the evidence has been preserved in a way that guarantees it hasn't been contaminated. There's also the matter of witness reliability. Decades after the crime, memories fade. Courts know this, and juries are often wary of eyewitness accounts from so long ago. Even when DNA evidence is introduced, prosecutors must show that it directly connects the suspect to the crime, not to innocent contact before or after the murders. The introduction of forensic genealogy presents its own legal complexities. While this technique has been revolutionary in solving cold cases, it's still relatively new in the courtroom. Defense attorneys can challenge its admissibility, questioning the accuracy of distant relative matches or the interpretation of complex family trees. Some states have clear legal guidelines for its use. Texas is still developing its precedent. And then there's the statute of limitations. While murder has no statute of limitations in Texas, certain related charges like arson or lesser offenses do. That means some parts of the case may never see prosecution, even if tied to the primary suspect. All of these hurdles feed into the careful, deliberate pace of the current investigation. Detectives and prosecutors know they can't afford another failed trial. One misstep could mean the case remains unresolved forever. For the families, the legal process can be as frustrating as the lack of arrests. Court delays, evidentiary hearings, and procedural disputes stretch the timeline further. In interviews, some relatives have expressed mixed feelings. On one hand, they want someone held accountable as soon as possible. On the other, they understand why the prosecution insists on building a case that can withstand every possible defense challenge. A former prosecutor summed it up for us. A cold case is like a one-shot game. You get one chance to make it stick, and if you miss, that's it. You better be ready. It is that reality, the delicate balance between speed and certainty, that continues to shape the strategy in the yogurt shop murders. More than 30 years after the yogurt shop murders, the case is still active. And in recent years, there's been movement. Quiet, careful, but unmistakable. The renewed momentum began in 2023, when the Travis County District Attorney's office confirmed they were collaborating with advanced forensic laboratories specializing in cold cases. These labs are not only reanalyzing DNA evidence, but also cross-referencing results with national and international databases, as well as public genealogy platforms. One promising lead involves a partial DNA profile recovered from a piece of binding material found at the scene. While incomplete, it's strong enough to narrow down possible matches through genealogical tracing. Investigators have built several family trees from this profile, zeroing in on individuals who lived in or traveled through Austin in the early 90s. Detectives have also received new tips, some coming from unexpected places. After a recent television segment revisiting the murders, an anonymous caller reported that a man once bragged about being there the night of the yogurt shop fire. The caller couldn't provide proof, but the name was new to the investigation. That tip is now being vetted against existing evidence. Another development came when a retired officer reached out with notes he had kept privately from the early days of the case. Among them was an unreported sighting of two men leaving the strip mall in a hurry around the time of the murders. The description aligns with one of the original composite sketches. Technology is also helping to expand the search. Law enforcement has partnered with digital forensics experts to scan old interview tapes for subtle cues, changes in tone, hesitation, or body language that might suggest deception. Using artificial intelligence, these recordings can be analyzed more efficiently than ever before, flagging interviews worth a second look. The investigation has also benefited from a more connected public. True crime podcasts, YouTube documentaries, and social media campaigns have kept the case in the public eye. While this can sometimes overwhelm investigators with irrelevant tips, it also increases the chances that someone with real knowledge will finally come forward. One detective currently assigned to the case told us off camera, "We're not sitting on our hands. Every day someone is working on this file, checking a new lead, rerunning a test, making another call. It's a big case, but it's not just sitting on a shelf." As for what comes next, investigators remain cautious in their public statements. They know the risk of overpromising and under-delivering, especially with a community that's been waiting for answers for decades. But they acknowledge that the combination of modern DNA technology, fresh witness input, and reanalysis of old evidence could converge in a way that wasn't possible even 5 years ago. Prosecutors have also made it clear, if a suspect is identified and the evidence meets the threshold, they will pursue charges, no matter how much time has passed. The goal is not just to solve the case, but to do it in a way that ensures a conviction. For the families, the possibility of an arrest brings mixed emotions. It could mean closure, but it also means reliving the trauma in court. One family member put it simply, "We want the truth. We just hope we're strong enough to hear it." The next steps are clear. Continue the forensic genealogy work, follow up on credible tips, and prepare for the day when law enforcement can finally name the person or people responsible for the yogurt shop murders. 3 decades on, the yogurt shop murders remain one of Austin's deepest mysteries. The crime scene told a story of violence and control. 4 young girls bound, shot, and set on fire. But the story has always had missing pages. Were the killers known to the victims? Investigators have considered that possibility, given the apparent ease with which the girls were subdued. Others believe it was a random act, 2 or more men seizing an opportunity late at night. Then there are the 2 unidentified men seen in the shop before closing. Were they the killers? Witnesses say their behavior was strange, but their identities have never been confirmed. The fire remains another question mark. Was it planned from the start to destroy evidence, or was it a last-minute decision? Forensic experts have debated this point for years. If it was planned, it suggests a level of criminal sophistication. If not, it may have been a panicked move. Even the physical evidence raises questions. Partial DNA profiles point to multiple individuals, but not all profiles have been matched. Could some belong to innocent patrons from earlier that day, or are they the faint traces of the killers themselves? The overturned convictions of the early 2000s add another layer of uncertainty. Were those 4 men falsely accused, or was there truth in parts of their statements? Defense attorneys argued coercion. Prosecutors at the time insisted they had the right suspects. Today, the official stance is cautious, acknowledging the mistakes without fully ruling out any lead. Then there's the timeline. Between the moment the shop was last seen open and the arrival of firefighters, less than an hour passed. That's a narrow window for such a calculated crime. How did the killers act so decisively, leave so little behind, and vanish without being seen? Even with the latest technology, DNA genealogy, AI-enhanced witness interviews, advanced ballistics, some questions may never be answered. Memories fade, physical evidence degrades, and those responsible may have built entire lives since that night, hiding in plain sight. One investigator who's worked the case for years told us, "This case is a puzzle where some of the pieces may never be found. But you don't stop trying to see the full picture." For the families, the unanswered questions are the hardest to live with. Every unknown detail is a reminder that justice hasn't been served. Yet they hold on to hope. Hope that somewhere in the existing evidence, in the files stacked high in the cold case unit, is the missing link that will finally tell the whole story. Until then, the yogurt shop murders remain exactly what they've been for 33 years. A case that has never gone cold in the hearts of those who care, even if it's still waiting for justice in the courtroom. December 6th, 1991. 4 young lives ended in an act of violence that stunned a city and defied resolution for over 3 decades. Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, Amy Ayers. Their names are not just part of a case file. They are daughters, sisters, friends. In Austin's collective memory, the yogurt shop murders stand as a reminder that evil can find its way into the most ordinary places. Yet the story is also one of persistence, of detectives who refuse to close the file, of scientists pushing the limits of technology, and of families who keep faith that the truth will come. For those who know something, anything, about what happened that night, the choice remains. Come forward, speak up, help give 4 families the closure they've waited for far too long. The Austin Police Cold Case Unit can be reached at the number on your screen. Anonymous tips are welcome, because in the end, justice doesn't have an expiration date. I'm your narrator. Thank you for watching. And to the families still waiting, this search is not over.